I'll never forget the way she said it. We were gathered around the dinner table, the clatter of forks and knives filling the small kitchen. My younger brother Jake had invited me to stay with him and his family after I lost my job. I thought I'd found a safe place, a temporary refuge. I was wrong. An extra mouth to feed my sister-in-law Courtney muttered as she slid a casserole dish in front of me. She didn't even look at me, just tossed those words like scraps to a stray dog. My cheeks burned, but I stayed quiet, eyes glued to the chipped edge of my plate. Jake didn't say anything either. He acted like he hadn't heard, like it was just another part of dinner. I saw the quick glance he threw at Courtney, the way his jaw tightened, but he didn't speak up. That silence stung almost as much as her words. I'd been staying with them for a few weeks, ever since the company I worked for shut down, and I was left with no paycheck, no safety net. I thought family meant something, that they'd understand I was trying my best. But every time I offered to help with the kids or cook a meal, Courtney found a way to twist it. She'd say things like, "Oh, I've got it under control," or "Why don't you let me handle that?" But her smile never reached her eyes. I started to feel like I was in the way, like I didn't belong. That night, her words echoed in my head long after the dishes were washed and the kids were put to bed. An extra mouth to feed. I replayed it over and over, wondering if I really was a burden. Maybe I was. I didn't have a job. I didn't have money coming in. I was sleeping on their couch, trying not to take up space, but it still hurt. I lay awake on that lumpy couch, staring at the ceiling. The glow of the street lamp outside the window pooled in yellow patches on the wall. I thought about my life before my own place, my own paycheck, my independence. Now I felt like a shadow of the woman I used to be. Courtney's voice cut deep, but what really got me was the look in her eyes every time she glanced at me, like I was something she couldn't wait to be rid of. I told myself it didn't matter, that I'd find a way to stand on my own 2 feet again. But late at night, when the house was quiet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd lost something I might never get back. I didn't say anything to Jake. He was dealing with enough already: 2 kids, a mortgage, a wife who was always on edge. I didn't want to add to his stress. So I swallowed the words that rose in my throat and tried to smile when he asked how I was holding up. But inside, I was crumbling. I knew I had to figure out my next move. I couldn't stay here forever, letting them think I was just a burden. I wanted to prove I still had worth, that I could carry my own weight. I didn't know how yet, but I knew I couldn't let her words be the final word. Because I wasn't just an extra mouth to feed. I was someone who had always found a way to rise again, even when everything seemed lost. And somehow I was going to prove that to myself, even if no one else saw it. In the weeks that followed, I tried to stay invisible. I woke up early, brewed coffee for Jake, and packed the kids' lunches. I told myself that if I made myself useful enough, maybe Courtney would see that I wasn't just taking up space. But she never did. Every morning she'd breeze past me like I was part of the furniture, her heels clicking across the kitchen floor. She'd smile at Jake, kiss him on the cheek, and barely glance at me. When she did look at me, it was always with that tight-lipped smile, the one that said, "Don't get too comfortable." I spent my days combing job boards on my phone, scrolling through endless listings for positions I was either overqualified for or underqualified for. My savings were gone. My pride was hanging by a thread. I'd been a strong, independent woman, once someone who could handle whatever life threw at her. Now I felt like I was clinging to the edges of who I used to be. It was the small things that hurt the most. The way she'd rearrange the fridge after I'd put groceries away, as if I didn't know how to stack a carton of milk. The way she'd correct me when I offered advice about the kids, like I was overstepping. I wasn't their mom, I knew that. But I loved them, like they were my own, and it broke me a little each time she reminded me of the line I wasn't supposed to cross. Jake tried to bridge the gap. He'd come home from work and ask if I needed anything, if I was okay. But he never saw the cold looks or heard the muttered jabs. I didn't want to be the reason they argued, so I kept it to myself. At night, I lay in the dark, listening to the quiet of the house. I missed having my own space, my own rules. I missed being seen as someone who mattered, not just another mouth to feed. One night, Courtney said it again. We were cleaning up after dinner, and I accidentally dropped a plate. It clattered to the floor, a shard of ceramic slicing through the silence. Courtney let out a long sigh and said, "This is exactly why you don't belong here." Her voice was calm, almost gentle, but the words hit me like a punch. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just picked up the pieces and swept them into the trash. But in that moment, something inside me shifted. I realized I couldn't keep living like this, tiptoeing around someone who saw me as a burden. I went to bed that night with a new resolve. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew one thing for sure: I was done letting her words define me. She might think I was just an extra mouth to feed, but I knew I was so much more than that. And someday, I was going to prove it. It all came to a head on a rainy Thursday. The kind of day where the gray sky pressed low and even the air felt heavy. I'd spent the morning cleaning the kitchen and folding the kids' laundry, trying to keep busy to prove my worth. Courtney came home from her part-time job around noon. She barely acknowledged me, just tossed her umbrella by the door, and started scrolling through her phone. The kids were at school, and Jake was at work, so it was just the two of us in the house. The silence was sharp, and I felt like I was holding my breath, waiting for the next blow. I was wiping down the counter when I heard her voice behind me. "You know," she said, her tone casual, "I just don't understand why you're still here." I froze my hand, gripping the damp rag. I turned to face her, but she didn't even look up from her phone. "Excuse me," I said, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. She finally lifted her gaze, her eyes cold. "I mean, it's been months. Don't you think it's time you figure something out? We're not a charity, you know. Jake and I have our own family to worry about." I felt my throat close up. I wanted to argue, to remind her how I'd always been there for them, how I'd given everything I had to this family. But I knew it wouldn't matter. She'd already made up her mind about me. "I'm doing everything I can," I said, forcing the words out. "I'm looking for work every day. I'm helping around the house. I'm trying." She shrugged like it didn't matter. "Trying doesn't pay the bills. You're just another mouth to feed." That phrase again. It was like she'd branded it into my skin. I felt the sting of tears in my eyes, but I blinked them back. I wouldn't let her see me cry. I turned back to the counter and kept wiping, even though it was already spotless. My hands were shaking and my mind was racing. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't keep letting her make me feel like nothing. When Jake came home that night, I didn't say a word about what had happened. He asked how my day was, and I just smiled and said it was fine. But inside, I was done. I was tired of being the easy target, the one no one would defend. I lay awake that night, listening to the rain tap against the window. In the quiet, I thought about all the ways I'd let myself get stuck. I'd spent so long trying to keep the peace, to not make waves. But what had it gotten me? Nothing but a permanent seat at the bottom of the totem pole. I knew what I had to do. I had to leave. I didn't have a plan yet, and I didn't know how I was going to make it work, but I couldn't stay here any longer. I couldn't keep letting her words define me. I closed my eyes and pictured the life I wanted, somewhere I could breathe, somewhere I could be more than just an extra mouth to feed. I didn't know when or how I'd get there, but I promised myself that I would. Because no matter how many times she tried to tell me I didn't belong, I knew deep down that I did. Maybe not in her house, but in this world. And that was enough to keep me going. The next morning, I woke up with a plan forming in the back of my mind. It wasn't fully formed yet, but it was there, a spark of determination I hadn't felt in a long time. I waited until Jake left for work and the kids were off to school. Courtney was in her room, probably still sleeping off the night before. I packed a small bag with my clothes, my phone, and the last of the cash I'd been saving from odd jobs I'd managed to pick up here and there, pet sitting, babysitting, cleaning houses. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get me started. I didn't leave a note. I didn't say goodbye. I just walked out the door and didn't look back. I found a room for rent in an old boarding house across town. It wasn't much, just a tiny space with a single window and a twin bed, but it was mine. My own place where no one could tell me I was a burden. I spent my first night there listening to the hum of traffic outside and the faint murmur of other tenants through the thin walls. It wasn't quiet, but it was peaceful in a way that Courtney's house never was. No one here knew me as an extra mouth to feed. I was just another tenant, and for the first time in months, that felt like freedom. The next morning, I walked down to the community center where I'd seen a flyer for a job training program. They were offering classes on bookkeeping and small business management skills I'd never had a chance to learn before. I signed up that day, determined to build something of my own. It wasn't easy. The classes were tough, and I was older than most of the people there. But every time I thought about giving up, I remembered Courtney's voice, the way she'd looked at me like I was nothing. That memory fueled me. I wasn't going to let her be right. I found work cleaning offices at night, and during the day, I studied and learned. It was exhausting, but it felt good to be moving forward, to have a purpose again. I started to dream bigger, to imagine what my life could look like if I kept pushing. I didn't know exactly where I was headed yet, but I knew I was done being someone else's burden. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hope, real solid hope, that I could make something out of this second chance. The weeks turned into months, and slowly my life started to shift. The classes I took during the day gave me more than just skills, they gave me confidence. I began to see myself as more than just someone trying to survive. I saw a future, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was building something that was truly mine. At night, I scrubbed office floors and emptied trash bins. My hands were always dry and cracked, but I didn't mind. It felt good to work to earn every dollar with my own two hands. The money wasn't much, but I saved every bit I could. One evening, as I was heading home from the night shift, I saw a sign posted in the window of an old crumbling building near the bus stop. For sale. Fixer-upper. Owner financing available. My heart gave a little jolt. I'd walked past that building 100 times, but this was the first time I really saw it. It was a 3-story brick building, worn and tired, but I could see the bones underneath. The potential. I stood there for a long time, imagining what it could be. A place where I could live and maybe rent out the other units. A place that was mine from top to bottom. My own name on the deed, my own rules. The next morning, I called the number on the sign. The owner was an older man named Mr. Franklin. He'd owned the building for decades, but he was ready to retire and move closer to his kids. We met that afternoon, and he walked me through the dusty halls, pointing out the cracked walls and the leaky pipes like they were no big deal. "It needs a lot of work," he said with a sigh. "But if you're willing to put in the effort, I'll make you a deal. Owner financing low payments. I just want to see it go to someone who'll care about it." I swallowed hard. The numbers were tight, almost impossibly tight, but as I stood there in that empty, echoing hallway, I knew this was my chance. My chance to be more than just someone else's responsibility. "I'll take it," I said. My voice was steady, even though my hands were trembling. "I'll find a way to make it work." Mr. Franklin smiled and shook my hand. "I like your spirit," he said. "Let's draw up the paperwork." The next few weeks were a blur of signatures and stress. I scraped together every last penny for the down payment. I worked extra hours cleaning offices, took every side gig I could find. Some nights, I didn't sleep at all, my mind racing with worries. What if I was making a huge mistake? What if I couldn't keep up with the payments? But every time doubt crept in, I thought about the nights I'd spent lying awake on that lumpy couch at Jake's house. I thought about Courtney's cold stare, and the way she'd said I didn't belong. I wasn't just proving her wrong, I was proving it to myself. The day the building was finally mine, I stood in the middle of the dusty front room and let out a long breath. The place smelled like old wood and mildew, but to me, it smelled like possibility. My building. My future. I started small, patching up the walls, fixing the leaky faucets, painting over the grime. I watched YouTube videos on how to repair plaster, how to rewire an old lamp. Each project was a battle, but with every fix, the building came to life a little more. So did I. Some nights, I'd sit on the front steps, sipping a cup of coffee, and looking at the building with a quiet pride. It still needed so much work, but it was mine. And that meant more to me than I could put into words. I knew I had a long way to go, but for the first time, the path ahead didn't scare me. I had something to fight for, something that was mine alone. The next few months tested every ounce of strength I had. The building was a mess, cracked pipes, peeling paint, a roof that threatened to cave in every time it rained. But I didn't let that stop me. Every night after my shift, I'd come back with a toolbox in hand, determined to make this place whole again. I learned more than I ever thought possible. How to patch drywall, how to lay tile, how to install a water heater without flooding the basement. My hands became rough and calloused, but I didn't care. They were the hands of someone who was building a future from scratch. The neighbors watched me from their porches, some with curiosity, others with doubt. I'd hear them whisper, "She's in over her head. That building's a money pit." But I tuned it out. I wasn't doing this to prove anything to them. I was doing it for me. Bit by bit, the building began to shine. The main floor apartment was the first to come together. Fresh white walls, gleaming floors, a new sink that didn't leak. I rented it out to a young couple who just had their first baby. Seeing them move in smiling and hopeful gave me a quiet satisfaction. I was no longer just cleaning someone else's floors. I was the landlord, the one holding the keys. The money from the rent wasn't much, but it helped. I used every dollar to fix the next unit, and then the next. I worked late into the night, fueled by determination and too much cheap coffee. My body ached, but I didn't mind. For the first time in years, I was building something real. One evening, I stood in the doorway of the newly finished second-floor unit, looking around at the clean, bright space. My reflection stared back at me from the window hair pulled back paint on my arms, but eyes that were bright and clear. I hardly recognized myself, but I liked the woman staring back. I thought of Courtney's voice in my head. "You're just another mouth to feed." It didn't sting anymore, because I wasn't. I was feeding my own dreams now. It was around that time that I got a call that made my heart skip a beat. It was Jake. I hadn't heard from him in months. We'd exchanged a few polite texts here and there, but nothing real. Now he was calling out of the blue, and I couldn't help but wonder why. "Hey," he said, his voice unsure. I heard you bought that old building, that you're fixing it up." "Yeah," I said. I tried to keep my tone steady, casual. "I've been working on it. It's been a lot, but I'm making it work." There was a long pause. Then he said, "Courtney and we're having some trouble. She lost her job and we're behind on the mortgage. We need a place to stay for a while, just until we get back on our feet." My mind raced. The irony wasn't lost on me. After all the times she'd made me feel small, now she needed my help. But I didn't let bitterness creep in. I'd built this life for me, not to rub it in anyone's face. "I have an open unit," I said after a moment. "You'd have to pay rent like everyone else, but—" "Yeah, you can stay." "Thank you," he said, his voice soft with relief. "Really, thank you." I hung up the phone and stared out the window. My heart was beating fast, but not with fear, with pride. Because this time I wasn't just the extra mouth to feed. I was the one opening the door. Jake and Courtney moved in a week later. They looked tired, defeated. Courtney wouldn't meet my eyes as they carried in their bags, and I didn't push it. I wasn't here to gloat. I was here to offer them the same chance I'd given myself a chance to start over. I showed them the unit clean, bright, and ready to be lived in. Courtney's mouth was set in a tight line as she looked around like she wanted to find something wrong, but couldn't. Jake just kept thanking me over and over until I had to tell him to stop. I didn't need his thanks. I just needed them to treat this place and me with respect. For the first few days, things were awkward. Courtney barely spoke to me, and I let her have her silence. I knew she was swallowing her pride, and I didn't want to make it any harder. Besides, I had enough to keep me busy. There were still repairs to be made, tenants to manage. I didn't have time for old grudges. But in the quiet moments, I'd catch her watching me when I was sweeping the front steps or fixing a leaky faucet in the hall. There was something different in her eyes. Not warmth, not yet, but something closer to understanding. One evening, I found her in the hallway, looking at the fresh coat of paint I'd just rolled on. She turned to me, and for the first time in months, there was no edge in her voice. "You really did all this yourself?" she asked, her tone quiet, almost curious. "Yeah," I said, wiping my hands on a rag. Piece by piece. It wasn't easy. She nodded, her lips pressed together. I didn't think you had it in you. I met her gaze steady and calm. I guess I did. We didn't say much more, but in that brief exchange, something shifted. The old bitterness didn't disappear overnight, but it began to fade. And as it did, I realized that this was bigger than just me proving her wrong. It was about me proving to myself that I was capable, strong, and worthy of respect, no matter what anyone said. That night, I sat on the steps outside my building, the warm glow of the hallway light behind me. I thought about how far I'd come from the woman who slept on a couch and was treated like a burden to the woman who held the keys to her own future. And I knew no matter how the past tried to pull me back, I'd never be that woman again. As the weeks turned into months, the atmosphere in the building shifted. The tenants were settling in, paying their rent on time, and for the first time the place felt alive. The hallways echoed with laughter, the clatter of kids running down the stairs. It was a far cry from the silent, dusty building it had once been. But living under the same roof as Jake and Courtney wasn't always easy. Courtney kept her distance, and I let her. I wasn't interested in rehashing old arguments. I'd moved on, and I wanted her to see that. One evening, I was cleaning up some leftover paint supplies in the hallway when Jake knocked on my door. He looked nervous, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" he asked. I nodded, wiping my hands on a rag. "Sure, what's up?" He stepped inside, glancing around my small apartment with an awkward smile. I wanted to say thank you. Again. I know we didn't always treat you right when you stayed with us. I guess I didn't realize how hard it must have been for you." I leaned against the counter, studying his face. "I appreciate you saying that," I said softly. "But it's in the past. We all did what we had to do to get by." He looked down, his shoulders sagging. "Courtney's been different since we moved in. I think she's realizing now how much she took for granted." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. We both knew how deep those wounds ran. A few days later, Courtney finally found the courage to face me. I was fixing a cabinet door in the hallway when she approached, her arms crossed tight over her chest. "Can we talk?" she said, her voice hesitant. I set down my tools and nodded. "Of course." She took a deep breath. I want to apologize for everything. I know I made you feel like you didn't matter, like you were just in the way." I looked at her, seeing the vulnerability in her eyes. "I did feel that way," I said honestly. "But I also know you were doing what you thought was best for your family." Her shoulders slumped. "I was wrong. And now you're the one helping us. I never thought we'd be the ones needing you." I took a moment to let her words sink in. It wasn't about revenge or holding on to anger. It was about finally being seen for who I really was, someone who could stand on her own 2 feet. "I'm not here to hold it over you," I said quietly. "This building, it saved me, gave me a second chance. I want it to be that for you too." For the first time, she smiled, a small, genuine smile that didn't feel forced or fake. "Thank you," she whispered. Later that night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring out the window at the city lights. I thought about how far I'd come, from the woman who'd been pushed aside and silenced, to the woman who owned the roof over her own head, and theirs too. The past would always be there, but it didn't have to define me anymore. I was no longer just an extra mouth to feed. I was the landlord. I was the builder of my own life. And that truth was finally out in the open for everyone to see. The final piece of my journey wasn't about the building or even about Courtney and Jake. It was about me, standing in the light of everything I'd become, and knowing deep down that I was enough. A few weeks after our talk, I decided to have a small gathering for the tenants. Nothing fancy, just some pizza drinks and music in the courtyard. I wanted to celebrate how far we'd all come together. The night was warm, the air soft with the scent of blooming jasmine from the small garden I'd planted out front. Laughter drifted up through the open windows, and for once, I let myself soak it all in. The life I'd built, the community I'd created. Courtney and Jake came down to join us, their kids chasing each other around the courtyard. Courtney brought a homemade pie, setting it down on the table with a shy smile. We didn't talk about the past that night. We didn't have to. It was enough to be here to share a moment of peace and understanding. As the evening wound down, I found a quiet corner for myself, leaning against the brick wall and watching everyone. A little girl from the second floor ran up to me, her face flushed with excitement. "Miss Landlord," she said, breathless. "Thank you for the garden. My mom says it's the prettiest thing on the block." I laughed, feeling a swell of pride in my chest. "I'm glad you like it, sweetheart." She scampered off, and I let my gaze drift up to the windows of the building. My building. My testament to resilience and quiet strength. For so long, I'd let other people's words define my worth. I'd let Courtney's cold glances and dismissive comments chip away at my confidence. But tonight, surrounded by the people whose lives I'd touched, whose lives had touched mine, I felt whole. I knew I still had challenges ahead. Repairs to finish, tenants to manage, unexpected expenses that would pop up like weeds. But I also knew I could handle it. Because I'd already faced down the worst of it, doubt, fear, the feeling of being less than. Now I knew my worth. And no one could ever take that away from me again. As the stars blinked awake in the night sky, I whispered a quiet promise to myself. I am not an extra mouth to feed. I am a provider, a builder, a landlord. And in that quiet courtyard, with the laughter of my tenants swirling around me and the soft glow of the building's lights, I finally believed it.